meetings. So he said, can we just have a cup of coffee? So we did, and we started comparing notes. And Ray was in Vietnam a year after I was, but the magical note was Cu Chi, Vietnam. Now, most of you probably don't know where Cu Chi is, but if you've traveled around Vietnam and been in a little combat, Cu Chi was where the 25th Infantry Division, see this is a Torah leaf with the lightning bolt, that's where the 25th headquarters was. And turns out Ray used to fly in and out of there. I worked to the west of it, and he did too, out toward the Cambodian border. Of course, we never went into Cambodia. You all know that. So that was part of the deal. We also want to make one housekeeping note too. There is no prejudice here. There are some Marines close to us, and we love all services. I had actually, for the Navy guys, I had actually worn my Naval War College t-shirt tonight, but my bride, who is right back there, Audrey said I had to dress up and wear a shirt. So that's why I don't have my Naval War College shirt on tonight. We want to welcome you, and what they recommended we do is read you a couple excerpts from the book. So Ray, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I'm going to read two parts. One when I was a very small kid, about 5 years old, and then another when I first got into the Army.
What page?
Okay, page 14.
Thank you.
Please help me out if I'm doing anything wrong. This is my first book reading, or anything like this. My first book. So. I knew that I wanted to fly since I was about 5 years old. When I told the doctor that I wanted to be a pilot, he scoffed and told me to get real. The racial bias told me that no black kid was going to be a pilot. I had to think back to that first time I thought about being a pilot and an aviator. It seemed like I had always wanted to be a pilot. I think that I was born with that desire. My Aunt Callie told me this story. My Aunt Callie was like my favorite aunt. She was my mother's youngest sister, and she's only like 12 years older than me. And when I was in kindergarten, she was a senior in high school. And my elementary school was right across the street from the high school. So she would walk me to school, drop me off at the kindergarten, and then go to her school. And then she would wait and pick me up and walk me home. And that's how I spent my first year with my aunt. She also taught me how to dance. You know, watching American Bandstand, anybody ever? Yeah, watching American Bandstand, I would stand on her feet, and she taught me how to dance. My Aunt Callie told me this story, and I was home after my mother died, when I would say I was really young, like I was 27 when my mother died. So in between assignments, I would always stop home, my hometown, to visit my aunt. And one of those visits, we were sitting around smoking cigarettes. My Aunt Callie smoked like every hour of every day. And drank coffee, you know, the percolator kind, that you could chew the little beans in it and all that stuff. Well, that's how I learned how to drink coffee too. So she told me this story, because I had no real idea at 5 years old what was going on when I was getting my shots. My Aunt Callie told me this story. When I was about 5 years old, in a doctor's office, getting my shots for school, the doctor, who was white, apparently wanted to be nice. So he asked me, what do you want to do when you grow up? My Aunt Callie said I was very proud and excited to say that I wanted to be a pilot. He looked at me, apparently not so nice and said, you should be something that you have a chance of being. When I was about 8 years old, I got a cast iron World War II Navy airplane for my birthday. It had folded wings and looked like a dive bomber. My backyard was part dirt and part grass. I lived next door to my grandmother, so I had a very large area to play in. I found this wooden box and a plank that I put on the box, and a brick to put on the side so it looked just like the tower, and I created a World War II aircraft carrier. Like all of us of my age, we watched so many World War II documentaries when we were growing up. So mine was to be a Navy aviator. So in my mind, it was the perfect ship, just like those that I saw in the movies. I placed the toy buildings around the yard, and they were my targets. In my play, I was the ace pilot and would take off from the carrier and fly around the yard, all kinds of amazing maneuvers. I was a perfect navigator, making my way to each target. All my bombs would fall right on each target. I never missed. I got back to my ship. I would make a perfect landing. I would then fold my rings and taxi to the parking area. I loved my playground. I loved flying my dreams. So that was like my early life. That's what I did. I made model airplanes. I talked about airplanes all over the place. So now I'm going to go to page 40. I'm going to talk about my first day in the Army.
But first, you have to tell them what Aunt Callie told you about.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you. I missed that. Okay, after I graduated from flight school, I shouldn't read it, but anyway, after I graduated from flight school, my Aunt Callie found that doctor who had retired and called him up and told him that I am a pilot in the United States Army. And she was very proud of that. So everybody who's been in the military has had a first day. It is like amazing that we even lived through that first day. We all have had experienced fear as little kids, sleeping alone for the first time, those noises in the middle of the night, the punishment we got when we did something wrong. But what about when we grow up? I learned that fear comes in many different disguises. The first day in the Army, I learned that I was the only one going to Fort Polk, Louisiana. Now, this is in 1968. All the others I knew were going to go to Fort Dix, New Jersey, which was 25 miles from my home. Actually 40 miles, but anyway, felt like 25. In the late 60s, the South was not a friendly place for a young black man from the North. But then my experience excitement was building because I was going to fly down on a jetliner. This is my first time in an airline. When I first took a lesson, and 1967 was my first time in an airplane. So I went from a two-seater to a 150-seater, and I was sitting in the back. So the first airplane I flew was on Delta Airline. It was a Convair 880. When I got to my seat, next to me in the window seat was an older lady. She was very small and smoked the whole way down to Louisiana, to New Orleans. Even though I was a smoker then, the number of cigarettes that she smoked seemed unusual to me. All the way down, this woman never said a word or even looked at me for more than a few seconds. When she did look my way, she gave me a look as I had killed her dog. I thought she just didn't like black people because, welcome to the South. Once in New Orleans, I found my way to the commuter desk of Trans Texas Airlines. I can't remember who they're a part of now, but they're no more. It was dark when we took off, and I couldn't see any of the land outside the aircraft window as we flew over Texas and into Louisiana en route to Fort Polk. I was 22 years old, and this was my first real fear I felt as a grown-up. It was in the middle of the night in a two-engine aircraft when we landed at Fort Polk, Louisiana. It was dark. I couldn't see anything out of the windows. I knew that I knew some horrible stories was about to come about being down in the South. The scary thing my grandmother told me comes flooding back to me. My grandmother used to tell me stories about being down south. Being down south to my grandmother was being in Maryland. That's where she was from. My grandmother is from Maryland, and my grandfather was from Delaware. So that's what their southern stories. As we taxied to the terminal, all of us were new recruits, excited, and excitement and the fear started to build. Then, like a bolt of lightning, two very huge men come into the front door and start yelling and screaming profanities at us all. They told us, really horrible things that they were going to do to us. They were our drill sergeants. The fear of the unknown took over. I had no idea that they were only playing games and they would really not kill me. The cabin was dark except for just a few lights. When I stepped out on the ramp, it was brightly lit. Two more drill sergeants were there, waiting for us, yelling and screaming and acting very aggressive. I did not know what to do, so I just followed their instructions to the letter. I tried not to look at their faces. I just did what they told me to do, but the fear kept on growing. We had to fall down, fall in line on the runway and stand at attention. They made us get down on our hands and knees in the dark and pick up everything that we could find on the apron. It was slow going. I did some push-ups and they yelled at me before we could get to the terminal. Buses were waiting and the yelling and screaming never stopped, even on the bus. Once at the reception processing center, with many of us only having a few hours of sleep in the last 24, and far away from home, it must have been about 1 in the morning. We were herded in line and to line up and station, herded to line up and station to station. People were calling us names that they all, these strange military people telling us what to do, like line up against the wall, excuse me, and stand at attention. A lot of us didn't even know what attention was. They shouted orders in the reception station, and they took us to get haircuts. I had a lot of hair then. Those with beards and mustaches, I had a beard too, and were ordered to shave. The fear of the unknown was on everybody's face. We took off our civilian clothes and put them in a box and put on loose green uniforms. About 6 in the morning, we were allowed to get something to eat, greasy hamburgers, as they led us to our barracks as the sun was coming up, and told us to get some sleep. This was just the start of our first day in the United States Army. I was very fearful that what was going to happen to me. My dreams was to fly, but I had no idea that all this was going on. Sometimes fear can help you focus. I was so overwhelmed by all the harassment, nothing that I had ever thought or imagined would happen to me. We got into our barracks, and I looked around and saw the top bunk. I climbed into the top bunk and put my head in my pillow and started to cry. The guy below me asked if I was okay. I said, hell no. His name was Tom Burnett, and he asked me if I wanted to have a cigarette. So that's how I met my best friend.
I'm going to take you a little further past Vietnam. I came home and I had already decided I wanted nothing to do with the Army. My 30 days leave after Vietnam was a fun time with family skiing and with friends avoiding the Army. But the good times had to come to an end and I went back to work. I had been stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, where I had served in the artillery unit as a cadet in 1965, so I still knew some people there. Also, Colorado Springs is a great town, with the Air Force Academy and Colorado College, plus many nearby ski areas. Sea Springs is not your typical Army town. My old roommate from West Point was also stationed there, so we rented a very comfortable apartment together. The high-rise building had an indoor pool, sauna, and good restaurants and bars close by. We quickly realized we were not in Vietnam anymore. The good life got better when I met a guy who played rugby for the Colorado Springs Grizzlies Rugby Club. I had played hooker at the West Point Rugby Club, and soon I was a Grizzly with a great group of guys. But the best part was teaching skiing at the Broadmoor. It was a small slope for teaching skiing, but it paid off with free passes for the big Colorado ski areas. There were a lot of great skiers in our group, so we always headed to the slopes on weekends. If it sounded like I was ignoring the Army and just having fun, it was, but it didn't last. The commander of my battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Darrell Irvin, was a good man, and he had given me the cushy staff job I had been looking for. As his S1, or personnel officer, he pushed me to take over one of the 6-gun artillery batteries that needed a new commander. The current BC was a friend and a skier. I wondered how I could better support the current BC, battery commander. But Colonel Irvin told me that he wanted me to make a decision and he wanted me to command the unit. I asked the battalion CO if I could speak to the first sergeant before I decided to become the battery commander. He told me that First Sergeant McDonald was one of the best in the Army and it was okay to talk to him. Top, we have a top right here. Top, as the first sergeant was known in each unit, was a black man who had been in the Army for over 20 years. This was 1970, and the order to desegregate the military had been issued in 1948. Racist officers kept it segregated pretty much until 1952, when Eisenhower became president. I sat down with Sergeant Mack and explained that if he and I were going to work together, I did not want to be left hanging. As I had seen the former commander left flapping in the wind. Sergeant Mack was a big black soldier with a commanding presence. He sat up straight. He looked me in the eye and he told me, "Captain, let me tell you something. I have been in this man's army for over 20 years, and there are 20 units down the street who know me and would want me as their first sergeant. If you don't want me, you just say so, and I will find another unit. But if we are going to work together, here is how it will be. If you want to make a decision that I don't think is right, I'll tell you once. If you still want to make that decision, I will tell you again. If you still want to make that decision," and he emphasized it, "I'll tell you the third time. And if you don't listen to me, I have not left you hanging. You have done hung yourself." I was smart enough to accept the job to become his battery commander. We became a great team. We did not always agree, but each time I heard, "Captain, we need to talk," I knew I needed to stop and listen to him. He was a great first sergeant and became a great friend. One more quick little story, and this involves Minneapolis and a guy who's standing in the back of the room there. He, former Marine. I interviewed 2 CPA firms when I went to work at KPMG. At the time it was called Pete Marwick Mitchell, a big CPA firm because it had the best clients in Minneapolis. With Audrey's teaching job, my wife was a wonderful school teacher. We managed to do well, and we bought a house for our first home in South Minneapolis. A new neighbor, Walter Rocky Rockenstein, was the only Republican on the Minneapolis City Council, and I worked on his campaigns for several years. At the time, Audrey and I were Republicans. We did manage to switch. My beautiful daughter is here also. She converted me. Rocky and I were moving some furniture around my house, and my West Point ring, this one, was rolling around in a drawer. And Rocky asked me why I didn't wear the ring. Rocky, as a former Marine, understood my answer. I told him that with all I saw and did in Vietnam, I had no interest in any connection with West Point or the military. Rocky looked at me and said, "There's a lot more to West Point than Vietnam." And I put the ring back on. Thanks, Rock. Okay, we would love to read you the whole book, but you can buy them up front when this is over. So we're going to open up now to any questions that you might have. Mia, do you have any questions? No, okay.
Hey, Bruce.
Mr. George? Yes.
First of all, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I know how hard it is, how much what you put into it and how thrilling it is to see it in copy. So congratulations again. I wanted to ask you about how you collaborated on the book. Did you, I could hear from what you were saying, you each wrote your own sections. Did you review and edit each other's sections? Are there sections you wrote together?
Ray and I decided that the time when we couldn't get together and we had coffee at the coffee shop, it was Dunn Brothers Coffee Shop. Take it away.
Yeah, it was. So Bruce came up with the idea to write a book, and I said no. And Bruce, a couple days later, he called me up and says, "Let's write a book." And I go, "No." So a couple days later, and then a couple days later, and a couple days later, not really that many, but a couple of times, and I finally said, "Okay, let's do this." So we started having coffee together and talking about how we're going to do this, and it came up that how we're going to make create a book that is both of us, and since we had so many, much of it is going to be separate. So there was a guy, an admiral, who was a prisoner of war, Stockdale. And him and his wife wrote a book. And I read it years and years ago, of Love and War. And it was a chapter that he would write and then a chapter that she would write about her experiences during the time that he was on deployment and out there, and when he was a prisoner of war, and it would go like that. And I thought, this is a really good idea for us. So I pitched it to Bruce, and Bruce says, "Yeah, let's do it that way." So we picked out chapter heads, and then we would start writing.
We also had been, at the same time, talking to classes at various high schools. And one was...
Miss Page.
Oh, I'm sorry. Miss Page. I was invited to speak at the St. Louis Park High School when my daughter was a senior. And I started doing that, and then we started it pretty much every year. And then when Ray and I got together, we started doing this together. And we did not only St. Louis Park, but we started doing Edina, and we did the St. Paul schools. Ray's from that side of town. I don't hold that against him, but he's okay. And we just, in these talking to the kids and our back and forth there, that really led us to how we were going to split things up. And especially with the kids, what our theme became was, don't let anybody stomp on your dreams. That was part of what we came up with. And Rebecca, you remember Stockdale, we make your bed every day. So you have to start your day with doing something. And so we started trading our stories, and we found out they were so similar. And between growing up poor in the East Coast and Cu Chi, Vietnam, and our Army service, we decided we were brothers, and that's what we were going to write about.
One of the other things you have in common is that you both crashed in helicopters. Ray maybe twice. I'm not sure. I lost count. You want to describe briefly those two episodes?
Well, okay. The first time was very soon into my time in Vietnam. I was a co-pilot then, and I was really getting comfortable with flying formations and going into LZs and I stopped looking at the troops on board and wondering why they would get on my helicopter and all this kind of stuff. And so we were doing a combat assault in a particularly high area, and it was actually the third time we were going into the area. And the troops jumped off, and we were coming out, and we took at least a half a dozen hits into the engine area, and lights came on and all that. And training just kicked right in. And I did everything that I was supposed to do. The aircraft commander was sitting over there. He got on the radio and he told the ship behind us that we're going down. And it was only like 20 seconds. Boom, like that. And we all jumped out, and the aircraft behind us landed right beside us, and we jumped in. And we flew back. And the next day, I got another helicopter with an aircraft commander, and we were doing the same thing.
Our story was a little bit different. I was in what they call a light observation helicopter, because by this time I was a battalion liaison officer, and the colonel that I worked with was the most highly decorated enlisted man to come out of the Korean War. This is a guy named Bob Couric, absolutely one of the finest people you could ever meet. Well, he went to OCS, and then by this time he was a lieutenant colonel, and he's running this battalion, and everybody loved him. And he and I were so close. He used his artillery the right way. That's how you really get close with these colonels. And what would happen is you would go into an area, you'd run into contact, people shooting at you, and then you would back off, and then I would bring in the artillery, and we did that day. I had 3 6-gun batteries supporting me. I had another one, those were 105s, and then 8-inch battery, one 8-inch battery, and one 155 battery, and we blew that jungle away. Well, we flew back in, and our first squad started in as we're circling overhead. They shot the point man, and the point man was carrying an M60 machine gun. The guy who shot him took his machine gun and turned it up on our chopper. Fire and noise, and you don't like to hear, when the rotors aren't working right, you don't want to hear that. And we were only up about 500 feet, but that helicopter came down, and you've seen the skids on the sides, what they land on, they were flattened out. So we're flat on the ground, and by this time, the chopper's on fire, I've got flames coming out, but I cannot leave that helicopter without my radio. I don't go anywhere without my radio. And here I am, but the radio was jammed because of the way the chopper crashed. It was jammed in between the seats. And I'm yanking and trying to pull it out. And Bob Couric turns back to me and says, "Bruce, leave the radio. I'll buy you a new one." What I remember most about that moment, though, was it was totally quiet. And if you've ever been in that situation where there's been, hi Sam, if you've been there where, my Marine buddy, if you've been in that situation where there's a lot of shooting going on, you hear this rattle all around you, and all of a sudden it's totally quiet. Now the helicopter's on fire, and the pilot and Colonel Couric are low crawling out of there, and I still didn't want to leave my radio, but he said, "Bruce, come on." Our guys, of course, stopped shooting because they didn't want to hit us. Why they stopped, I have no idea. There is a God, and she was protecting us. And so it was just amazing. And we got back to our guys, and in another 15 minutes, we had another helicopter, I had another radio, and we were back up in the air and ran through those guys.
Do you have a question?
In today's world of computers and everybody communicating, how hard was it for you to be away from your family and get a letter maybe once a month, or?
You know, that is a very good question. I mean, it's one of my better parts, is Bruce has a lot to do with that too. But when I first got to Vietnam, I said to myself, well, I'm going to write my mother as much as I possibly can. So I wrote her once a week. You know. And then I got a whole box, whole mail. And I went, and I was famous in my unit because I got all this mail from my mom in boxes and stuff like that. And my mother knitted me socks out of wool. And I wore them. And all that. So I wrote all the time. So it got, after the first 3 weeks, then it was like every 3 or 4 days I'd get a letter or a box from home. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and when I got to my unit, you know, to initiate, they said, you know, do you have a girlfriend? Yeah, I do. And they made bets on when I was going to get a Dear John letter. So, yeah, it's that, you know, women's humor. But anyway, so every day, almost, when I get mail, they would come up and say, because there was a bet on it. So when I finally got a Dear John letter, you know, I was like, oh, wow, I'm famous, because they took me into the hospital, bought me a whole bunch of beer and all that. So I was about 2/3, yeah, it eased the pain just a little bit. So about 2/3 of my way through Vietnam, I had duty officer one night, and one of our sergeants came in and said, you know, I just talked on the Mars radio station to home. I said, you can do that? So the next day I went down, in the middle of the night, went down and talked to my mom for about 20 minutes. So, you know, told her I was all right. I'll be home in 3 months. You know, that kind of stuff. But yeah, to this day, I still write letters and postcards. I have a favorite sister, and she's in Washington, D.C., and we write at least once a week. That. And to my older brother, when he was alive, I wrote him at least once a week. So, yeah, I like letters.
My experience was a little different in that when I left, by the way, my Dear John came my first year at West Point, so you know, there's nobody special at that point. Audrey didn't come up to later. But when I left, my mother handed me a yellow legal pad, and she said, now you write every day. You tell me what you're doing. Now, I actually did. I mean, I didn't send the letters off every day, but I did write down what I was doing every day. I cannot believe the things I wrote to my mother. I mean, I was telling her about the actions and what being shot at and what Vietnam was all about. And when a best friend was killed in action, I even wrote to her about that because she liked Gary better than she liked me anyway. So I had to tell her. But it was the yellow pages, as we call them. She saved every one of them. So if we can convince you to read the book, you too can read the yellow pages, because you'll see quotes within my section on the Vietnam section. By the way, that's only I think 60 pages of the book. It's about combat, but we don't glorify that. When we talk to the kids, I mean, as I say, I can't believe what I wrote to my mother, but it was most interesting to receive letters and to send letters, but for her to save those yellow pages for me. Audrey typed them up, and I use that as my Vietnam story in the book. So you'll see the quotes. Sam.
Hello, Ray. Hello, Bruce. Good to see you again. Actually, I bought the book. I promised Bruce that I would come to the signing and buy it here. Thank you. Just a couple of things, because I have a question about it. I haven't read it yet, but Bruce, you and I narrate stories during our Armadillo concerts, and there's a message there. There's a message for the audience. So my question, because I haven't read the book and haven't also served, as you know, in Vietnam, I'm curious, as a combat veteran, what I'm going to walk away with once I read the book. So my question is this, what is it that you, Ray or Bruce, or Bruce, what is it that you want your audience, your readers to walk away with at the end of the day and say, glad I read the book? What is that? What is that?
Well, I'll start this one off because, by the way, Sam spent over 200 days online as a Marine combat soldier. So thank you, Ray, for your service. Now, there's a little girl behind you patting you on the shoulder. And she is the reason we wrote the book. What we wanted to say was that there's going to be a lot of people coming into your life, like that doctor who said to Ray, you can't be a pilot. People who said to me, you'll never go to West Point. Well, what our thesis is in the book is don't let anyone stomp on your dreams. Don't let anyone tell you, no, you can't do that. If you want to do it, that is your place in this world to figure it out, find the mentors who can help you get where you're going, and let them help you get there. And I'll add one little quick story to that. I had an English teacher in high school, and he did not want me to go to West Point. When I got accepted, my art teacher cried, but Miss Joyce she loved me too. But this guy did all he could to stop me from going to West Point. And through 4 years of West Point, we corresponded. Through 4 years of the Army, including Vietnam, we wrote back and forth. And I wrote him about the combat stuff too. And in 2 years of grad school, I got out of the Army and went and got an MBA at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. My last day at Penn, a package shows up. It's a shoebox full of my letters to Hugh Willoughby, my English teacher. And a little note on top that said, now you tell me you weren't brainwashed. Now, that's another part of our book. Ray and I agree we weren't brainwashed. We were simply highly trained, and that's part of what the military does for you in those crazy situations we were in. We were able to come home. Not that the other guys who didn't come home did things wrong, but that training got us that ability to come home. And that's a big part of the book, is to not only get the education, but get that training and get help from your mentors to get you where you want to go.
I have to repeat what Bruce has just said, and I'd like to add that seeking out people that will help you is my point. People are going to tell you no, people are going to be naysayers all over the place, but there's always going to be somebody if you look hard enough. Sometimes you don't have to look hard enough, but they're right around the corner. But sometimes you really do have to seek out and search for people who are going to really help you fulfill your dream. And I did. In the book I talk about going to 3 airports in New Jersey just to learn how to fly, get somebody to teach me how to fly. And I did, and I found a guy, a school that was going to teach me how to fly. And with that, I found the community because my instructor, Marty, introduced me to a business guy who took me on a flight with him, bought me lunch when we got to Harrisburg, then let me fly his airplane back and in. I never met him again, but he was just so happy to do that for me because that was he loved flying and he was going to give me that opportunity too. And that's how it has been throughout my career. There's been a lot of people that say no, but then there's also a lot of people that say that one special or 14, 15 special people that say, come on, let's learn how to do this. And I'm going to teach you.
Can I tell the Senator Pastore story?
Sure. Quickly.
I needed permission. Okay, I'll make this fast. When I finally I went to work in Montana my summer before I got the appointment, before my senior year in high school. My uncle was the meanest guy I've ever met, and he ran that ranch in Montana worse than any military training I ever went through. So Ranger School was a fun time compared to working for my Uncle Elton. But I had forgotten about the appointment. And I got back and I had a phone call from Senator Pastore's office. John O. Pastore was Mr. Democrat in the Senate, and his office called and said they wanted a picture of me. I said, great, so I grabbed a snapshot from my mom's snapshot file and ran it down to his office and took it up there, and the secretary looked at it, and she looked at me, and she went back to the back office, and she said, this won't do. Go have a head and shoulders shot taken. Well, at the time I was delivering newspapers, so I'm in a winter coat and everything. I went down to, you know, one of those things that take the 4 pictures? Okay, took the 4 pictures, ran it back up to her. She looked at me, she looked at the 4 pictures, took it back in the back office. And then this little guy comes out of the office with his little bitty mustache, and he says, you go downstairs. There's a photographer down there. He said, you go in there, you tell him to take a portrait picture of you, and have it sent up to Senator Pastore's office. By this time, you know, wow, I realized that was Senator Pastore. So I went down, had the picture taken. The next day, the pictures appear in the paper. All these guys with their ties on and looking great. And here I am in my open collar shirt. But I won the appointment from Senator Pastore.
Ray, how long did you stay in the Army? Would you do it again? And would you advise a young person to do it?
Whoa. I was in the Army for 22 years, and there was points at which I almost got out. One time, the Army was about to say, we don't want you, but then they changed their mind. And then there was a time when I decided, I was thinking, oh, there's got to be something else better to do. And then I couldn't think of anything else better to do, so I stayed in. Would I do it again if there was a way that I could do it without going through basic training? I would for sure do it again, for sure. Would I advise a young person to go into the military? Yes, I would, under certain conditions. I mean, there are some people that are not amenable to that type of pressure and training and yelling and screaming at you for a time. And some people can't put that in a proper place. You know. And but those who can, I think it can be a real benefit for the rest of your life, because I've been out of the military now for 34 years, and I still think of times that I used that training, either mental fortitude or, especially when I was learning how to fly airplanes, and I was working at Northwest Airlines, that stick-to-itiveness, and I do have skills, and I am going to live up to my dreams, because the Army said you can't. And so yeah, I would.
And I think we both would. If someone is interested, we encourage them to look at it.
You, in your malleable youth, went from artist to officer after going to that little prep school on the Hudson. You left the academy in butter bars on your shoulders, and you were so sharp that when you walked, air molecules split in front of you. Then you go to Vietnam, and by the time you get back, you want nothing to do with it. You take your ring off, and you write about that in your book. And then you put the ring back on. That's metaphorically too simple.
leaving West Point, they sent you to I was an artilleryman, so they sent me to artillery school, then they sent me to Ranger School and Airborne School, then to the 82nd Airborne. Absolutely fabulous training. I was ready. And as a trained professional soldier, I went into Vietnam to do my job. That's what I was trained to do. And I protected. One of the things I say in the book is the duty, honor, country, West Point's motto, that goes out the window. What comes in is protecting those guys around you. And when I saw how some of those guys were treated by some of the senior officers, when I saw the only important thing was body count, that wasn't what I learned at West Point. That West Point teaches strategy, and we had no strategy in Vietnam other than this crazy body count thing, and that soured me totally. I also had a run-in with a major who I did not agree, who came into my unit, chewed out my NCOs, and because I was off doing some other things, and I threw him out of my unit. And I used some language that was not appropriate for my granddaughter. That did not help.
But when you came back, despite all the indoctrination and training that you had, you came back soured. But somehow you wear the ring proudly now. And you deal with people like this all the time that are so damaged from the experience, yet you recover.
Rocky recognized my PTSD. My wife recognized my PTSD and got me through it. I was so upset with the military. I knew when I came back, I was out. I was getting out. My roommate was getting out. A whole bunch of us. That's what happens after a war. They spend all this money to train you at West Point, and then most of the guys get out after combat. I went back to the Army's personnel operations. I said to him, if you'd send me back to grad school and then back to West Point to teach, I would stay in. I was soured, but I wanted to make a deal. This colonel sits up straight and he explains to me, he says, Captain, you're going to go back to your career course, then you're going to go to, there was a training that they sent you through to become an advisor in Vietnam. Tour 2. And I said, wait a minute, you're telling me you don't want to let me go back to grad school and teach at West Point? You don't want that? He says, Captain, the Army doesn't make deals. I said, Colonel, then neither do I. I've got 6 months left in the Army. You can't send me back to Vietnam. And had I gone back as an advisor, I'd have been right there at the end of the bug out phase when a lot of people were getting zapped. And so it was a brilliant decision. Sarah, how are we doing on time?
We are looking good. We can have one more question if somebody has a question. Otherwise,
What did you do at Northwest?
Oh,
You met me.
yeah. Yeah, Howard Bell is my oldest Minnesota friend. I got there in 1990 and you got there in 1992. Yes. Well, what I did at Northwest was I came there with only a commercial helicopter rating. And I flew Blackhawks, which are 2-engine helicopters. So they needed instructors because they were building up in 1990, just getting a lot more people on board. And they said, you teach 2-engine helicopters, well, we'll give you 2-engine airplanes. So I taught 757s. So I went through the training program and I got qualified to teach, and I was teaching that aircraft and I thought to myself, I need to know how to fly airplanes. So I took my GI Bill and I went down to Holman Field and I learned how to fly. I got within in about a year, I got my multi-engine commercial instrument rating and single engine commercial instrument rating. And it was fun flying. I just loved doing that. So with that, I got into the instrument procedures part of Northwest, and I started teaching instruments procedures too with a really great guy named Michael Slacks. He's not with us anymore, but he was really amazing with instruments. So I did that, and so I got into orientation and annual recurrent training. So then I became the manager for the new hires. So I got them for 2 weeks, and then every year we had annual recurrent training, so I got to do that too. So then Northwest had an internal hiring program. So I said, oh, I want to do that. So, but anyway, I was like 54 years old. I was like older than dirt. But Northwest had just had a age discrimination suit they lost. So they couldn't say I couldn't do it. So I went through, they said you have to get your airline transport rating in an aircraft. And Howard got his in the DC-9, and I got mine in the 727. And I had a class date for October and about 2 days. Well, it was September 1st. They said, you have a class date. And I went, great. And then 9/11 happened. So that put everything to hold. And I started doing test and ferry, moving 727s around the system and all that kind of stuff, which was a lot of fun with no passengers on board, you know. And then they retired that, and I went to 747s, and I taught second officers for that. And then I got too old. So I retired at age 59. 60 was the limit at that time. So I retired from Northwest at age 59. And then I went to work for Lifelink 3. I went back to helicopters.
And Ray was flying helicopters, medevacs, all around Minnesota. And part of the story that I love, again, you're dealing with one of the most famous pilots here. The number of black pilots in commercial aviation or military aviation is less than 1%. And so this is an amazing person that we have, right?
It's 2 in 1 room.
I know it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's about the high percentage right there. Yeah.
I noticed, I'm sorry, when you told the story about that crash in the helicopter, you used your left hand to reference the aircraft commander. And I thought, is that a rotary wing, fixed wing dysmorphia that you just,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Aircraft commanders in the Army, just like in civilian, even though in helicopters, we sit on the right. But to keep everything, I don't know, like civilians or just like military work, the aircraft commander sits on the left side. And for us new guys in country at that time, all the instruments are over on the right side, so we're really happy. You know. But then when you move over to the left side, it's just a lot more visibility, and that's what you need at that time.
Okay, we promise no discrimination here, and since we have a Marine in the front row, we're going to allow him with the last question.
One question. Maybe more for Ray, but my unit, I was up the DMV, and I saw my unit transition from there in 1969 to Okinawa and then to California. And those are really, really tough times for the military making that transition. from the combat to garrison. And so certainly I was out by then, but I know what we dealt with in California and Okinawa with drug use and everything. It was a tough time. And somehow the military transitioned. And was it the all-volunteer army, and it was just time that kind of put the ghost of Vietnam behind, and they moved forward? What would you say about that?
I don't think that the all-volunteer army was a point in time. I was still in the draft military, and there were draftees that showed up with my unit, and when I left Vietnam, I decided to stay in the Army. And when I was leaving Vietnam, I got a choice of where I wanted to go. So I went to Germany, because if I'd gone back to the States, like Bruce, 18 months later, I would be back in Vietnam. So I went to Germany, and that was the best move that I ever made, because when I got to my unit, which was kind of a small detachment, everybody there was, all the pilots were Vietnam vets. So we could commiserate with each other, and the beer was really good, and all that kind of stuff. But you're right, the Army went through, or the military went through a stretch of time, I would say 5 years, where they were taking drug tests. Everybody had to take drug tests like every 6 months or so. There would be a no-notice drug test in our units and all that kind of stuff. And there was a mindset of what the military was all about. What were we going to be? Was it going to be a disciplined unit, a force, and not just a ragtag, literally, people with underwear on their heads and all that kind of stuff. And it took that long for the military to get a hold of it and to proceed on to what we have become.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. If you just line up to the glass display case, so you can ask more questions and get an autographed copy. We do have a limited amount of books. However, if you did want to do a special order, we can help you with that, as well as get a nameplate of autographs from Ray and Bruce. But thank you so much, and thank you.